Welcome to another episode of Austin Tech Connect. This is the show for people who care about innovation, community, and the conversations that makes Austin, Austin. I'm Thom Singer, and I'm with the Austin Technology Council. And today we have a great one. We have some smart ideas, real talk, and in a few moments, you're going to end up really wanting to share this episode with a friend because today we are joined by Phil Gilbert. Phil, welcome to the show.
Hey, Tom. Thank you very much.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. For those of you who don't know Phil, he is the former head of design at IBM, and he is the author of Irresistible Change, a blueprint for earning buy-in and breakout success. And that's what we all want. We all want that breakout success. So he has been living here in Austin since 1995, although he's been visiting Austin since his days as a college student at University of Oklahoma. Although we won't hold being a Sooner against him, but he's been visiting since back then. So he has a love affair with Austin. He got involved early in the 80s in the PC world and said, hey, this is going to be a big deal. He founded a company. He sold a company. He joined in around 1997. He joined PC Order. For those of us who've been around a long time, you remember PC Order. He joined them. He went on to help recreate Lombardi Software and turn them into what they were, which eventually sold to IBM. And after he sold it to IBM, this whole idea that is now the book came into play. So we're going to learn a little bit about this. So Phil, let's go back to the early 80s. You see a PC. And I know for like the younger people, they're like, what do you mean you see a PC? I remember around the same time, because I would have been in high school then, I remember when one of my friends had a PC and we came over and we're like, wow. And compared to what computers do today, it did nothing. But, you know, my phone is 1,000 times more powerful than that PC.
Yeah.
But how did you catch the bug around computers?
Yeah, it was really, my first job out of university was to work for what was called Peat Marwick Mitchell. Now it's called KPMG, a consulting firm. And I was hired by a client to help. He had purchased a controlling interest in a publicly held life insurance company of all things. And he realized shortly after he bought it that something was wrong. And so he hired me into the insurance company with another set of executive leaders to try to come in, figure out what was wrong and turn things around. And literally the night that was my last day of work at Peat Marwick Mitchell, I was driving home past a Computerland and I was like, and Computerland, to your point, nobody knows what these things are anymore. Back then, Computerland was a huge retailer for these new things. I walked in there, I bought an Apple IIe computer, and simply because I didn't know what it was going to do, but I knew it was going to be important for this next job, this next thing, and once I, turned it on and booted it up and loaded VisiCalc, which was the first spreadsheet by Dan Bricklin, I was hooked. It was like this thing is going to change the world. And at the time, a lot of people were like, I don't know if it's going to change the world. In fact, at the time, professionals, lawyers, etc., executives, they were actually shamed if they had these things on their desktop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people, I can tell you in the mid 80s, I was in college and I had a professor, and I mean, it's embarrassing to say a major university professor said this, but we had to turn in, I was a political science major, so you wrote a lot. We had to turn in our papers written on a typewriter. We couldn't use a word processor, and this would be like 1987. Right. We couldn't use a word processor because he told the class, and this guy was 150 years old at that time. Right. He said, you can't use a computer to write your paper. And even at the time, I was like, computer's not writing the paper. It's saving me a lot of whiteout and having to retype a whole page. That was the only thing a word processor was doing, but he wouldn't let us use it because somehow he thought it was doing the work for you. And I know that was for professionals. That was the same thing. They thought it was cheating.
Yeah. Cheating. And also it was something their admins did, except back then you didn't use the word admin. It was called secretary, but that's what somebody else did, or the typing pool did if you were in a law firm. So no, it was that was it. That was the moment. It was literally driving home. I was in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and it was a rainy night. I can visualize it very clearly. That first touch, the first contact.
It's interesting you talk about Computerland. Last year we had the second year. Later this year, May or June, I haven't picked the date yet. We'll have the third year of the 8-year launch of the Austin Tech Hall of Fame. And last year, one of the people who was admitted into the Hall of Fame was Carol Thompson. And somebody said, I don't understand why she'd be in the Tech Hall of Fame. And I said, well, first of all, if you were here in the 90s, she was the puppet master of everything going on around the tech community. I go, but if you go back to the 80s, she owned the franchise of Computerland. And I was explaining to someone who was like 30 years old, 40 years old, that you used to buy your computers the only way before Dell was Direct and others. You went into a store, and essentially Carol Thompson sold everyone in Austin their first computer in the 1980s. And people were blown away that that was a thing, that if you owned a franchise of Computerland, you were the center of technology. But that was true.
That was totally true. Totally true. It's like GameStop today.
That's right. That's right. So I just want to touch on it quickly before we get to sort of the Austin scene. But then you started your own company. What was that all about?
So roll forward a couple of years. We actually we figured out what was wrong with that company. And interestingly, it was because I had created this shadow IT system with this PC and discovered fraud was going on in the claims department. We solved that problem. We worked with the 35 or 37 states that we were admitted into, and a bigger company bought us once we got turned around. And I didn't see myself, I never saw myself working for a big company. And so as soon as the acquisition happened, I was like, I'm going to start a consultancy, and I'm going to figure out how to put one of these things on everybody's desktop.
And back then we didn't even call
professional's desktop.
We didn't even call them startups back then, right? It was just started you just founded a company. It wasn't a startup. It was just
didn't even use the word founder. I just started a company and rented some space, and it was a consulting company that and our mission was to put a PC on the desktop of every professional and executive. That was our mission. In doing that, I quickly discovered that there was a ton of resistance to that. And through that experience, then created a first product. But back then, the world was really, really small, the tech world. And so working with Microsoft and working with Apple and working with the leaders of those companies was no big deal. I mean, there were, in 1985, 86, there were, even up to 88, 89, there were 100 people that mattered in the PC game. Yeah. And you knew them all. And, Gates and Jobs would wander through the tech expos at the time. Yeah. Windows World in Atlanta or New Orleans. And, these people would just be walking around looking at the exhibits. So it was a very different time. It was a very fun time. And because of that, you got involved in a lot of the things that, started shaping the modern world of distributed computing.
Nice. So after that company, you moved to Austin, and we'll just sort of fast forward to you joining PC Order. I mean, for those of us who were around at the time, for a short period of time, PC Order was like the hottest company in town. So
it was great.
What was that all about? How'd you end up there?
So Christy Jones, who was the founder, it was spun out of Trilogy,
and
of
course.
Christy founded PC Order, and Christy and a friend of mine had gone to school at Stanford together. And so I got connected with Christy, and she was just moving PC Order from PC Order. And I'm going to go into exactly what the business model was, but PC Order had been selling to mom and pop kind of computer lands, but mom and pop computer lands. And they were transitioning to, once Dell went direct, they were transitioning the technology to big enterprises, Compaq, Hewlett-Packard, IBM, companies who wanted to go direct but didn't know how. And my background was in working with very large enterprises. And so I got connected to Christy, and I went there for a few months to help them make the transition from kind of selling to mom and pop and marketing and supporting mom and pop needs to scaling to enterprise level. And once I got there, I fell in love with the culture that she and Joe had kind of formed and built and very intentionally created this culture that was just incredible, and fell in love with it, and so stayed there for several years.
Nice. And Joe also last year was put into the Austin Tech Hall of Fame. So you know what that era of time was all about, because you know all these people. But so after PC Order, you went on to be one of the people who helped grow Lombardi Software, another company that was sort of a local legend. I knew Rod back in the days, Rod Faveron. And so you did that and then sold that company to IBM. So let's really quick talk about Lombardi, and then I want to get into your book.
Yeah. So the interesting thing, kind of to start the transition into the book, the interesting thing about Lombardi is we built that. When I met Rod at PC Order, Rod was head of sales. At the end, I was president, and Rod and I had kind of committed, hey, the next thing that comes along, let's do it together. And so Lombardi came along. Austin Ventures pinged Rod. We took a look at it. There's really something interesting there, and so we started running with that in 2002. The interesting thing is, over the course of my career, I talked about this struggle to get PCs onto the professional desktop. Long story short, one of the things I ran into in the early 1990s was this design as a profession, design as a formal method, but also this notion that was behind the founding folks that founded IDEO. So David Kelly, Bill Mogridge, this thing that we today call design thinking, which was for non-designers, how do you scale this ability to really think about your user, put yourself in your user's shoes, develop empathy at scale. That was the real thing that we did at Lombardi, was we didn't just build products using design and design thinking. We built the entire organization using these ideas and concepts. And it created a very different company. It that manifested very different in the marketplace, and we were winning our market. IBM buys us. And that's really kind of leads into what I was then asked to do at IBM.
Nice. Well, it's interesting. You talk about PC Order. I was the marketing director for Brobeck, Flager, and Harrison. So we shared a parking lot because we were catty corner right there out on the lake. So although I don't know that you and I ever crossed paths.
One of the greatest buildings and office buildings in Austin.
Yeah, no, in fact, when
5001, was it 5001 Plaza or something?
Yes,
like that?
Exactly. And then our buildings were sort of catty corner, and Brobeck had this giant patio. And when I was the marketing director, I created a thing we called the patio party. And, many years later, people still talk about those parties that were on the lake out at the patio after work, bringing the community together. And that was my creation, was the patio party. And we took it to Andrews Kurth, and we didn't have a patio, so we would do it in a bar downtown. But there you go. But that was my claim to fame in the tech industry, is back in the early early mid 90s was the Brobeck, or later the Andrews Kurth. We still called it the patio party, even though we were in a bar.
Right. No, it was classic. And of course, Plaza on the Lake was just because we had a couple of jet skis down there and a boat. You could kind of go down there and do that. But the craziest thing was when I think it only ran 1 year. It may have run twice, but Trilogy and PC Order sponsored that half try.
Yes.
And I'm a cyclist, but it's the only one I've ever done. But you started out in the river underneath the bridge, and it was just this janky, it was horrible.
Those were the days.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So you have this book, and I love the title, right? It's Irresistible Change, the blueprint for earning buy-in and breakout success. And this came out of Lombardi and IBM. So what's the book all about? Let's talk about the book.
Yeah. So I got to IBM in 2010, and IBM was in real trouble, huge morale problems. They were having real struggles in the marketplace. And the culture had kind of been hollowed out from years of kind of shareholder capitalism that the at the time, current CEO had kind of put in place, and had kind of hollowed out the company. To the point where in 2010, IBM had completely missed the modern cloud. We get bought in 2010, just to put it in perspective, the iPad in January of 2010 is when the deal closed. The iPad would be announced in April. We knew about it. We were building a purpose-built iPad SaaS application at Lombardi. And the first thing that IBM did after the acquisition was kill that application. And the general manager who killed it, and into whose division we had been bought, said, business to business SaaS is not going to be a thing.
I mean, somebody should write a book of all the quotes that are just wrong when change is happening.
I mean, and in 2010, it was obvious what was coming. I mean, forget that Salesforce was founded in 1999. It's not that this was a new idea, but all these things were clearly coming. But IBM was missing, their sense making in the marketplace wasn't good. So anyway, I was first asked to lead the business process management sector at IBM, which was about 1,200 people, into which Lombardi's 250 had been assimilated. And over the next 18 months, I used these same practices that we built Lombardi on to completely transform that little 1,000-person unit. IBM had about 400,000 people at the time. And we took 44 products down to 4. We greatly simplified the product portfolio. Our customers loved us. We took about 30% market share from our competitors, and our employee engagement scores were the best in IBM. Fast forward now to December of 2011, Jenny Rometty becomes the new CEO, and she looks at IBM and she realizes the problem that she has inherited, and here's the story of what we've done in this little BPM group. And she came to me and said, whatever you did there, can we do it everywhere? And that's what led to the book. And the reason it's called Irresistible Change is, as I was thinking through that problem of, wow, changing the BPM group at IBM was hard because a lot of legacy processes and legacy folks and legacy thinking, but I had been put in charge of it. And so, if you're the leader, if you're the explicit, leader, executive of something, and you say, we've got to change, people change, or you do what you have to do. The problem with the 400,000 was quite different. The problem with the 400,000, none of them reported to me. I had no authority. And so the question of how to change 400,000 people based on my experience with transformations in the past was, the revelation hit me. This cannot be something that Jenny just mandates, because mandates don't work. Right. People get defensive. People do compliance theater. They pretend to change, but they don't really change. People have to genuinely adopt something for it to be real and for it to have impact. And so what hit me was, this is the same thing the same problem a startup has. With a startup, the world doesn't know you exist. With a startup, the world doesn't know your product exists. And the momentum of the status quo in the world is against the startup ever converting anybody. You've got to make your product so good that people disrupt their own status quo to adopt it. And that's what we did with our change program. We ran our change program like a product. There was never a mandate. And every team that came into the change program came in of their own volition, and they chose to adopt change. We made change so irresistible that people wanted it.
So it's so interesting, because I've been working on sort of reinventing the Austin Technology Council for the last couple of years. I came in, I spent the first year stripping it down to the walls. I created a 5-year plan. We're 3 years into it. But one of the things that I'm trying to lead, and my board wants to do, and a handful of other people, is we want to see the community adopt sort of this change, and maybe you call it sort of a change back to this idea of corporate citizenship, where if you're based here, you have an office here, your leaders want to show up. Your leaders want to be on boards. They want to do this. And it's not just write a check to a charity. It's you want your people to show up. You and I were talking about the old days of the Austin Cup, where it was a bowling tournament that went on for a day or two. And every startup, everybody in town put up a team of 4, and they put money in for the charity that it went to. I don't know if we started the Austin Cup back up, if companies would care to have 4 people participate in that. And so I'm trying to make community involvement irresistible. So now I'm going to have to go read your book.
There you go. There you go. That's what it's all about. And, and it gets down to these tactics of, I talk in the book about how do you pick your first projects, how do you build your leadership team, who should be on it. And then, some of the, I tried to document, my intention was to document every decision I made and give people the situation we were in, the decision that was made, and what was the outcome of that decision. It's not a strategy book. This isn't why you should transform. It's not going to tell you, oh, AI is coming, it's transforming. Like, this is, if you know you have to transform in today, every company.
Right. I mean, I can't think of anybody that I engage with that their company doesn't need to be thinking about transformation right now.
Exactly. And so this book starts there. Okay, how do I do it? It's when I wrote it, my goal was, if you had two change management books on your shelf, one would be Leading Change by John Cotter, and that would be the strategy and kind of the high level, and then you'd have mine. This is the tactics of how to do it. But little things like this notion of, they just don't get it. That was a forbidden phrase on my leadership team, because if somebody didn't get it, that wasn't their fault. It was our fault. And so we had to figure out, what are all the hacks, like from what we were just talking about. Okay, so people don't know the Austin Cup existed. They may not have the financial backing, the VC backing of somebody like Austin Ventures that was kind of a coalescing force. It was kind of a
I think all their companies participated in that, and several other community.
Yeah. Probably 80% of the Austin Cup had Austin Venture on their cap table. Mm-hmm. Well, that doesn't exist today. So, what's the hack around that? How do we get people wanting to do this and realizing that it is in fact good for their companies, good for their employees, good for their morale, good for their recruiting, all those things, to join in the new Austin Cup or whatever it might be.
Yeah. So
that was what we did.
I love what you said, that if someone says they don't get it, it's not their fault. It's your fault for not spelling it out right. So, I mean, that's ringing in my ears with things just around ATC. So I guess the question is, how do you do that? What's the game plan for whoever the leaders are to make sure people understand?
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's a facts and circumstances situation. In our case, we were dealing with an entity that had lost their way in the market. And so we had to quickly figure out a way to get sense making, external sense making and empathy with our users back into the culture. For companies today with AI, it's completely different. In some cases, it's how do we blow up our complete product development lifecycle, using these things. But that's where the learning comes in. In the approach that I talk about, the first thing that we did is very much like a startup. If you have a new idea, a new product, and you're a B2B kind of startup, what you do is find one or two companies that you give them the software, but you work with them for 6 or 7 months, and you learn, A, how the software fits into their systems, but B, how their systems are rejecting the software. And you work around that. So part of the method that I lay out is, pick a very few number of teams. In your case, it might be a very few number of companies that show a proclivity to wanting to get involved in the community, and work with them for 6 months or a year and figure out not only exactly what it is that they want to do, but then also all the things around them in their ecosystem in the company that are the antibodies that are pulling them back into the old world.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what's been the feedback on the book? I know that like 5 different people said, Thom, you have to interview Phil. And to a T, they all said Phil, as if we're old drinking buddies. Right. And I don't know that we'd met, or if we had, maybe you were at one of the patio parties across the parking lot from PC Order.
I definitely was. I'm sure I was.
So you were on my guest list, but I didn't know you. But everybody was like, and people are like, you got to talk about his book. What's been the feedback for the book? Because obviously they're calling me saying interview Phil. People like it.
Yeah. The feedback has been good. It came out in November. It was published by John Wiley and Sons. And so we've got a bit of a footprint that's starting to grow in master's programs, both MFAs for design leaders, engineering schools. I just got back from last week. I was in Duke for their Masters of Engineering program. And also in some MBA programs are starting to pick it up in their leadership sections. So in terms of preparing the next level of leaders, that's been really interesting. What's been really fascinating, though, is on the initial release for any book like this, it kind of goes out to my network, and I've got, several thousand people that I mail to, and many of them buy the book just to support me. But what's been really fun is starting in really early January, I started hearing from executives that had been given the book from other people, from friends or acquaintances that had recommended it to them. And that's been real gratifying. It dropped in an environment where, as we just said, there isn't a CEO on the planet that doesn't say their company is in transformation because of AI.
Oh yeah, no, I talk to people every day.
So, yeah, exactly. And so the conversations are pretty much accelerated around, and it's always the same thing. We did this. We've got, 30% of our codes being generated by AI. Our individual productivity is through the roof. But I'm not seeing any different outcomes. Like, we're not actually moving faster. People seem to be moving more. They say they're moving faster, but the team's outcomes are not different. I'm not taking market share. I'm not really seeing releases, demonstrably better. And so I work with them to kind of help them, first of all, realize that they're measuring outputs and not outcomes, and have started to really gain some traction around kind of a different way to look at AI transformation as a result of it. So it's been gratifying. It's, still early days. It's only 3.5 months old, but it's pretty fascinating, the conversations that I'm having and how much resonance this notion of not mandating, but offering change as a product that people desire is catching on in the marketplace.
Nice. That's awesome. So everybody should run out to wherever you get your books. Is there an audio version?
There is an audio version.
Nice.
You can get audiobook. You can get it on your Kindle. You can get it on your...
However you like to consume books, go check out Irresistible
you want to read this
Change.
book, you can get it.
Yeah, that's right. Check out Irresistible Change by Phil Gilbert. Phil, I want to switch gears here. I like to end all my interviews talking about Austin. We call this Austin Tech Connect, and it's the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. You've been here a long time. You've been here about the same. I got here in 91. You got here in 95. So we've seen a lot of the growth. We both worked in that same parking lot that at the time was kind of an epicenter of a lot of things going on. Where do you think Austin's come today? Where's Austin today? And what do we need to watch out for or look forward to in the future?
Yeah. I mean, I worry that Austin is getting too much. By the way, my first startup, I started in LA. I love California. And at the time, in the early 80s, just real quick, because I'm getting ready to diss California, or Californians. But at the time, LA was actually quite a software place. The hardware was done up in Silicon Valley, but the early days of distributed computing, McAfee, tons of companies, kind of LA was important. Orem, Utah was important. Canada was important. It was kind of funny that now everything is in Silicon Valley. But I do worry about, I feel like there was a renegade spirit to Austin back in the 90s and 2000. It wasn't as corporate. I feel like there were some more interesting and involved creatives and companies. What we didn't have there, though, which we do have today, was a solid group of mid-cap leaders. And that has grown out of primarily the Trilogy Network, or certainly heavily influenced by that Trilogy Network.
For sure.
Which is fantastic. It's great to have kind of seasoned executives. But I do worry about the kind of lack of scrappiness that I feel like kind of some startups had back then, kind of brought in by huge valuations and people that have less to lose in a way than what we felt like was on the line back then. So, but growth is good. Bob Dylan once wrote, "He not busy being born is busy dying." So a lot of people lament the fact that Austin has grown and gotten more mature, and it has. but it's certainly better than the alternative.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Los Angeles in the 70s and the 80s. And so I watched Los Angeles go through this giant expansion. Yeah. I went to college in San Diego in the late 80s, and San Diego went through. So all I've ever known is living in a place that just grows like crazy. So
if you live in a good place, it's going to grow and it's going to change.
People are going to come.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And people are going to come.
But you are right about the part about scrappy, and that's the thing I try to say is as a community, we need to remember that Austin, our tech ecosystem as a whole, we're only in 12th grade on our way to a PhD and a career. We have a long way to go. And if you remember 12th grade, you think you're on top of the world. And then one day you turn around like sophomore year of college and you're like, oh, I'm nowhere. And you've still got this huge hike to do to get through your education and your career. And I like to remind people we're only halfway up that mountain. We are still a scrappy growth community.
Yeah, totally. And I think that, I actually think that Austin can be, in many ways, I think Austin can be kind of better than what we have achieved in Silicon Valley, which is to me a little insular and probably a little arrogant. Our tech roots in Austin go back to the 60s.
Yep.
I mean, it started with hardware. IBM, Texas Instruments. IBM opened its first offices in 1966. One of the first companies to be here, and has grown through all this. And then, of course, with the University of Texas and the state partnership, MCC and places like that in the late 80s, and then Austin Ventures comes along. So there is a really interesting and I think a much more diverse tech history and a much longer tech history than people realize here. And I think understanding those roots and being a part of that long-term tradition here in Austin is a good thing. And I think our community can benefit from that education and that understanding and kind of get back to some of those things that are much more community oriented.
So one of the things I did when I took this job is I agree. Exactly what you said. People didn't know how we got here. And another city that has a growing tech ecosystem and a tech council with a $7 million budget and 15 people on staff. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute. How does your city, which nobody would look at and say, wow, how do we have me? And, enough budget to pay me. And the leader of that tech council said, when you're trying to grow something, everybody wants to be on board. When you think you've arrived, it's harder to get people to care. And they said the other problem is because nobody in your town knows the history. And this is a person who's lived in this other city his whole life, older than me, 60-something years old, said, go back to Austin and ask everyone under 40 years old, who is Dr. George Kosmetsky? And he goes, and I bet nobody knows. So I came back and I asked 25 people that question, and only 2 knew. And one of them actually said something to do with UT. They didn't really know who he was, but they nailed the UT connection.
Yeah.
So 23 out of 25 people had no clue. And what the person in Pittsburgh told me is that if you don't know your history, you're going to have trouble growing. And he said, you ask any entrepreneur in Pittsburgh, what is 60% or whatever it was, 50% unemployment like in a community? And he goes, everybody knows because we tell that story because we want people to know we have to build. And it was like, wow. Yeah. So I created a talk called The History of Austin Tech that I do for any nonprofit in town that wants to hear it. And we do. We trace it back to June of 1966, which is IBM coming to Austin and the hiring of Dr. George Kosmetsky by UT. And so that's where I've had people argue that Tracor going public in 1957 is where you could start it. But I take it back to 1966 because that's the year I was born. I had nothing to do with it, but we'll take it back to June 66, which is my birth.
No, I really think there's a lot to that that we take for granted here in Austin today, and therefore, to your point, we're less concerned about community because we just assume. I think we assume that this came about because of maybe more recent people and things that have happened.
My joke. Wait, I want to touch on that. My joke is if you ask anyone, when did the tech boom begin? The answer is 5 years before they moved to Austin. Doesn't matter who it is. If they moved, if they moved here in 91, it started in 88. If they moved here last year, it started in 2000. Yeah,
that's probably true. And that was the golden era, right?
That was the best days of Austin. That's right. It was the day everybody moved here.
Yeah. But anyway, it would be it would be super fun and special if we could get that community spirit back. And things like, I suspect that most startups that have started in the last, I'll bet most startups that have started in the last 10 years don't know that virtually every startup in town used to give warrants to charities.
Yeah, the Entrepreneurs Foundation was a major part of that piece.
Yeah. And it was and it was fantastic because it connected you to the community, like I say, even kind of on your cap table, if you will.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of always there. And then participation in events around that, like the Austin Cup or whatever it might have been, become much more natural, and it just kind of flows.
Yep, absolutely.
Well,
Phil, I really appreciate you being a guest here on Austin Tech Connect. Any final words?
You can go find out more about me and more about the book and more about my thoughts about how to make change irresistible at my website, which is creatively enough called Gilbert.com.
Nice. So you were ahead of the game on getting that .com with your last name.
Been rocking that since 1989.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Phil, again, thank you for being here, and thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened, but also thank you to the sponsor of Austin Tech Connect. The entire year of 2026, we are sponsored by Calavista Software, software development without the drama. Since 2001, Calavista Software has been trusted by startups and Fortune 100 companies alike for their custom software needs, and we appreciate them being a community champion and supporter of the Austin Technology Council. We'll see you next week with another interview with somebody just as entertaining and insightful as Phil Gilbert. So make sure you share this episode with everyone you know in the tech community. We'll see you next week.